Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and today we're going to be talking about security, and that's security of our homes and our commercial premises. Now joining me today are two ex-London police officers of some quite high rank, I believe, and they formed their own company called My Local Bobby. So joining me is David McElmy and Tony Nash, both founding directors of the company. Welcome to you guys.
Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, well I set up My Local Bobby with Tony about 3 years ago, and we looked at what was missing effectively from policing, from security on the streets. Tony was about to retire from the police as a borough commander in Newham, and I invited him to come out, and we walked around the streets literally for 3 months, 4 months, for hours on end, and looking to see whether we could see policemen anymore walking the beat, the old-fashioned Dixon the Dock Green type character. And we just didn't see in 3-4 months a single walking policeman. So the idea was to set up a exactly that, an old-fashioned, community-based, dedicated beat Bobby, and that's what we get, and that's what we've set up. It's an old-fashioned concept of Dixon the Dock Green.
Well, let's deal with the sort of private home sector first. And I mean, it is quite clear that the reduction in amount of policemen on the beat has had an effect on crime, so much so that I think you could almost say that the whole matter of policing privately is a matter of statistics, isn't it? I mean, I think now we're having burglaries that are not being investigated because the fruits of that are probably not that good for the statistics of the police. As you know, I've been a magistrate for a number of years, and I've certainly noticed the reduction in court appearances of sort of burglaries, that sort of thing. Tony, what's your feeling about that?
I have concerns about where we are nationally at the moment. A crime is a crime, there's a victim at the end of it, and that's probably the most traumatic event for them. So one is, yes, we need to investigate, but two, there's also about support for that individual. Now, with every investigation, you do get facts, and it's the build-up of those facts that allow you to identify who's responsible and then become proactive to address that issue. So I think it's short-sighted not to go to offences and not to investigate as they once were. And I think the position that we're in now with what we do and what the company does is to support victims, is to support communities, to try and make sure that those basic steps are taken, that we gather evidence, but we deal with the victim's perception, we deal with the community's perception, because the crime stats are one thing, but the reality is someone's perception is their reality. And part of reassuring a community is that level of engagement, and part of it's reduce crime, and part of it's listen to what they have to say so that we can actually address those issues.
Yes, I mean, we're here filming in Canary Wharf, and this is an area where there's a multitude of very expensive, high-profile apartments, and this must be like a chocolate factory for a burglar, mustn't it, really? And of course, a lot of the developments are having to put in their own security and use companies such as yours to actually give peace of mind to the residents. And I think one other thing that we forget, it's the same with drug dealers, isn't it? There's a lot of people who say, well, you know, at a certain end of the market, should we make it legal? Should we just ignore the fact that it's an illegal substance? But they forget that the same chap offering young kids a smoke is the same guy that's going to be offering them something a lot more serious a month or two down the line.
Yep.
And I wonder if the same applies to sort of burglary and that kind of crime. The burglar starts off small housebreaking, gradually progresses. I mean, do you see this pattern?
That's always been a pattern. Probably as long as we've had criminals. They go from a certain level, which is a base level, effectively learn how to offend, and then they progressed to a different level. My concern is a lot of people refer to, oh, it's a minor burglary. If you're the victim, that is not a minor offence. That is life-changing for some people, psychologically, emotionally, and that has to be addressed. And we have to be strong in terms of law enforcement to make sure that the offenders are caught and they're actually brought to justice and that there is an outcome. So if you look at the whole criminal justice system has to come into play, because otherwise the communities have no confidence. And if the communities have no confidence, then they tend to retreat from their engagement with law enforcement, and that's where we've got to merge the two together.
Just tell me, in the past when, shall we say, private police forces have been formed, we've had accusations of sort of being vigilantes and sort of turning up with sort of very heavy-handed sort of modus operandi. Your approach is very different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's. I mean, at the end of the day, the fact is that if our bobbies were to do anything wrong, that would impact on our company quite dramatically. You know, as a police officer, you get a complaint. You know, there's a process, but it's not going to damage the police service. If one of our bobbies was just one of them was to misbehave, that would seriously impact on our business. So we look at recruiting the right people, very experienced people, usually ex-police, ex-military. We give them a raft of training, and they are supervised and managed quite robustly. You know, we know where they are at all times because they're tracked, and the clients have access to the tracking as well. We've got a national radio system, we've got a command and control centre, we've got a CCTV control room centre. So we've got a whole system that supports the bobbies on their beat effectively.
So you really are offering a service that's effectively a sort of Pucker secondary police force, aren't you? You really are.
Well, it goes further, because what we're offering that's so different is it's not just that front end, prevent and deter high visibility on the street. Behind that sits the experience of 30-year plus career detectives. So if something does go wrong, there is a burglary, there is a motor vehicle crime, there is a theft, then we will immediately take witness statements, do all of that stuff that the police aren't doing nowadays, the house-to-house inquiries, gathering CCTV. We will endeavour to catch those people, work with the police, and if the police won't prosecute, we actually will prosecute those offences as private prosecutors. So it's a whole process.
David, let's just rewind for a second. So somebody has a burglary. Typically today they'll phone the police, and the police will say, well, OK, we'll take details, but very little else happens, does it? I think they may have a visit from forensics if the value is high enough.
Yes.
And presumably from that they take DNA samples, check for fingerprints. But there's no actual detection process, is there?
No, and we see this day in, day out. You know, if you go back 20 years, when we were young detectives, you would visit every single burglary. So you'd have had a uniform officer there, you'd have a detective turning up, do house-to-house inquiries down the street. Obviously there wasn't CCTV then, but nowadays you've got this huge advantage of CCTV that will give you opportunities, plus the forensics. And so all of that's gone. It doesn't happen anymore. What we try and do, or what is to bring all that back so that there is a support mechanism to investigate burglary.
So just tell me the process. So I have a burglar at home, I call the police, I sense a level of, I'm not going to say disinterest, but a level of sort of acceptance that there's nothing much that can be done about it. What's my next step if I want to get in touch with a company like yours?
We would investigate any of our clients' offences. That's part of the service. And we will go a little bit further than that, because if we identify potential suspects, because we've got a complete proactive capability, we will carry out surveillance on those suspects. And we've actually been doing that for the past 5 weeks on a team of prolific burglars who we've actually witnessed committing offences. And we've been working and passing the information through to the police. Again, the response hasn't been exactly huge, but
well, I think that was going to be my next question. is what is the official police body's reaction to your services?
Mixed, I think you can say.
Yeah, it is very mixed, and it depends on area to area. We always try to build really good relationship, not just with police, but with other security companies and particularly local authority as part of that community safety partnership. So for me, it's about build the relationships. We have a good relationship in most of the areas. In fact, all of the areas we have a working relationship. It varies in terms of the strength. In certain places like Westminster, it's getting stronger and stronger all the time. In other places, up in Enfield, it's been strong from the outset. So they're different journeys in different areas, but it's always we understand the key partners are police, local authority, and potentially other security companies.
And if I just add, the one thing that we've found, particularly in areas like Enfield, where we've got a very strong relationship with the police, is not only have we prevented and deterred crime as a group partners with the neighbourhood watch and the police. But where offences have been committed, I think every single offence has been cleared up through the work together, by working together.
Okay, great. I'm talking to David McKelvey and Tony Nash, who are founding directors of My Local Bobby. We've been talking about security in terms of our homes and the streets that we live in. Join me after the break when we'll be talking about the commercial aspect of their operation. Hello and welcome back to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm talking to David McKelvey and Tony Nash from My Local Bobby. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
We talked in the first half about how security is affecting our homes and how the police are following up or not following up, as the case may be. The second string to your bow is your involvement in commercial premises, shopkeeping, shopping areas, tourist areas, particularly in London. Tell me about your operation there.
So we do public realm security for various areas, central areas of London. And effectively, in the same way as we do residential, we've got bobbies walking the beat. So we've got distinctive beats, dedicated bobbies for those areas who get to know all the individuals there, all the businesses, the residents that do live there, and the people on the streets as well. So they know who should be there, who shouldn't be there, and they will deal with anything from begging through to robberies, dippers, shoplifters particularly are an issue, and they're doing that job, that old community type police officer's job again, but on the streets of central London.
Sorry, obvious question. Who pays for that, David? Do shopkeepers pay as a sort of consortium?
There's different structures. So you have business improvement districts who commission their own security services, so that's one. But you have individual businesses who pay for their own security. So there's a mixture of the two.
Now, again, I've seen in the courts, I suspect that the levels of shoplifting and what they call dipping, which is going into people's handbags and things, is probably no less than it's ever been. In fact, in some areas, probably even more so. And I know, again, as a magistrate, we had various directives to be fairly strong in tourist areas where it would affect the local economy if it became a sort of hotbed for crime. But it does seem that the police are taking a very relaxed attitude to this sort of crime. Is that really the case?
I think if you look at things like shoplifting, that's a simple one. I think there is a reluctance to pursue a lot of it because of the amount of abstraction of time from people being out on patrol. It would take them out for a day for one shoplifter, and that's a conversation. So that's a difficulty. Part of that's process driven. I think with things like the, as you said, the dippers, I think that's different. I think they do have a lot of proactive operations to try and target it. But again, when you've got a finite resource and you've got a terrorism threat and all of the other things that come into it, such as violence and gangs, that's spread very thinly. Yeah. So there's limited amount that they can do with the asset that's there. So what we do is, where the patrols are in place, is we add another layer which is really supportive of the communities and the businesses in that area, and it is the fusion between the private patrols and policing where we fit to try and support it. And if you look at shoplifting, I know in one particular street I estimated there's 1,000 offences a month that are not reported because they do not feel that there will be any action, and people have given up, which we tell them is not the right thing. Report it.
It is a very difficult thing, isn't it? I mean, you really have to differentiate between the guy that goes into a shop and pinches a sort of Armani suit to against the perhaps down and out person that takes, from one of the food shops a sandwich and a can of Coke or something. But having said that, it's the same crime, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and that's the way it's got to be dealt with. At the end of the day, from my perspective and the way we look at things, is the only suitable organisation or authority to deal with that is a court. A court decides on sentence, a court decides on guilt and innocence. and it's wrong for the police to make a decision. They turn up at a shoplifter and release that person despite there being overwhelming evidence. That's not their job. Their job is to gather evidence, put that evidence before the CPS, who will make a decision whether it's in the public interest, as you say about the down and out, and whether there's sufficient evidence. And then it should go to a court, and the court should then make that decision, not a police officer on the street. And that's where things have started to fall apart, because the whole retail area, the high street, are no longer reporting shoplifting offences. So, you know, you're skewed as to the amount of crime going on. Of course, it's costing this country billions. The economy is being decimated. The high streets are being decimated by this, you know, as it's referred to by police as minor crime. It's not minor crime.
No.
And that's important to remember.
Well, the volume makes it serious crime.
Absolutely.
Doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, what's quite interesting now, I get a little bit upset when I go in local shops and I see people not wearing masks and not distancing and, you know, not following the one-way round system and one thing or another. And if you speak to the security guards, they'll say, well, we're not going to say anything because the moment we say something, we get threatened, we get abuse and all sorts of things like that. And I'm going to presume that the same applies to the security people dealing with shoplifters in some of the West End shops.
I mean, there's a real issue. There is a complete correlation between violence towards retail staff and shoplifting. There's work ongoing with the British Retail Consortium looking at the same problem. When we speak to those retail outlets, we ask them to look at security within the context of health and safety at work, because that's a legal requirement. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, you need to look after your staff. There has to be safe methods of operation, and it has to be looked at through that lens. So that's a key thing. But we talk about shoplifting in a minor context. We talk about one store that was losing, and it's not a particularly big store in terms of footprint, but they were losing between £10,000 and £12,000 of stock a week. Lots of people detained. We ended up dealing with an offender there. Word got out that there was a sanction if you got caught there, and that dropped to less than £1,000 a week. Now, £1,000 is still £1,000 too much, but that impact has moved from something which is potentially £750,000 to something which is nearer £50,000.
This really does come back to visible presence, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, what you're providing in the main.
Exactly. It takes our people, you know, often less than 2 minutes, often, you know, 30 seconds to arrive at the scene of something. You know, we'll call the police and it's taking anything up to 2 hours, and sometimes they don't turn up. It's having someone there that you can see, and it's, I think the words that you used earlier on, peace of mind. It gives the public, you know, peace of mind to know there is someone out there in uniform who is going to proactively step in and do something.
I think, again, you mentioned earlier, this business of somebody coming into your home or even into your commercial premises of a place of work, can be very traumatic. Very traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can remember years and years ago when I first moved to Docklands down here, we had a flat, and I just got up in the middle of the night and I went for a glass of water or something, and I just saw the keys swinging in the balcony door, and I suddenly realised that I'd actually walked by somebody who'd come up the structure, come into the flat, been in the flat. I'd walked by them, and that really did sort of unsettle me for many, many weeks. And even now, I often think back to those days. So when you have somebody who's had their home wrecked or their business trashed, it's very, very traumatic. And
absolutely.
I can really see the worth of your service there, and I can see the deficiency in the police force. But I don't know how we solve that. I mean, I'm guessing that at some point in time you will receive resistance from the police if you step over too much into their territory.
Possibly, although, you know, we do work with some police services very, very closely, and hand in glove, and it works. You know, you can see the results if you take the particular area in Enfield. The results are outstanding, not only in terms of reductions in crime and antisocial behaviour, but those that commit crime get caught, and that's all. It's all you want from a police service or a security service presence, is that you know that you reduce crime, you make people feel safe and secure in their environment, peace of mind, as you said, and also that if something does occur, they want to know that someone's going to respond, someone's going to investigate, and they can do their very best to catch the people who committed that offence. And that's
And dish out the
simple.
punishment, of course.
And of course they end up in front of the court.
Which of course brings us on to the final subject of this conversation and the sort of services that you and other companies are providing, and that's this business of private prosecution. Now, for our viewers who are not familiar with these terms, do you want to just explain what the term private prosecution means?
Yeah, I mean, we commenced private prosecutions about 5 years ago, and it's effectively anyone in the UK within England and Wales can bring a private prosecution, a business, a person, any individual. And it's no different to a police brought prosecution, CPS brought prosecution. You have to meet the code test for Crown prosecutors. Is there sufficient evidence? Is it in the public interest? Providing those two counts are met, then you can get a criminal summons, and the process is no different. The summons will be served, they would appear at court, and it's exactly the same as if it was the CPS dealing with a matter. It will be brought by our solicitors and barristers.
So you apply on behalf of the victim to the local court, is it?
To the local magistrates' court. They will review the evidence. You know, is there enough evidence? And then at that point, they will issue a summons. And that individual will then receive the summons. If they fail to appear, then the warrant will be issued for their arrest.
Okay, and presumably in terms of punishment, they would be subjected to the same tariff that a Crown prosecution would,
Exactly the same, no difference. And we have an information sharing agreement in place with the Association of Chief Police Officers Criminal Records Office, so that all of those offences that we prosecute are recorded on the Police National Computer, and all of those people we convict, we've got a 100% conviction rate. All of those people will have their DNA, fingerprints and photographs taken, so that if they do re-offend in the future, that conviction is recorded and can be brought forward again to the court in another offence.
Okay, and for our last 30 seconds, perhaps 15 seconds each, would you like to tell me what you think the future of policing holds then?
I can tell you what I think the future should be. Policing has talked a long time about modernisation. I think now is the point in time that it needs a Royal Commission to look at law enforcement and look at the role of private security against statutory bodies that are involved in law enforcement, and look at what that looks like in a modern world and how do they work best together.
Okay, David.
And I just think that the two work in tandem, and that the authorities, the government, the Home Office need to see that there is a definite role for private industry within that police and the enforcement environment.
Okay, great. Well, Tony Nash, David McKelvey, thank you very much indeed for telling us all about My Local Bobby.
Thank you.
Absolutely intriguing subject. I'm sure we could go on infinitum about this, but unfortunately we have to draw to a close. But again, my thanks. So thank you for watching. Hope you found that interesting, and join me again, Stephen Galpin, on Property Matters.